Servitors can be divided into two classes, those that come from the magician's personal unconscious, and those that come from, or via, the collective unconscious, i.e. those that come from the magician and those that don't. Servitors' powers increase in direct proportion to how deep in the psyche they are. Consciousness has very little power. It's the shallowest level of the psyche. It's about planning, not doing, whereas magic is all about doing. The self is the deepest part of the psyche, hence the greatest magician, your inner Gandalf, as the sublimated white wizard. Do you want to sort out your enemies? Summon a servitor to afflict your enemies. Did the Jews create a collective servitor, a god form, in fact, that was designed to avenge them on all their enemies? The Bible can be read entirely as the tale of the collective servitor, Yahweh, of the Jewish people, massacring the enemies of the Jews. Unfortunately for the Jews, it turned out that the Assyrians, Babylonians, Greeks and Romans all had superior servitors to call on. Yahweh's temple was totally destroyed twice. The Jews were enslaved numerous times. Their servitor Yahweh wasn't up to the job. Why is he still worshipped? He's a proven failure. Unfit for purpose. Of course, his real purpose is not to be God, but to be the God of the Jews, an entirely different thing. The Jews worship Yahweh because if they didn't they would cease to be Jews. Being Jewish is much more important to them than believing in the true God, who has absolutely nothing to do with Judaism, a totally false, man-made religion. Was the Jewish golem a servitor? Wikipedia says, in Jewish folklore, a golem is an animated anthropomorphic being that is created entirely from inanimate matter, usually clay or mud. The word was used to mean an amorphous, unformed material in Psalms and medieval writing. Many tales differ on how the golem was brought to life and afterward controlled. During the Middle Ages, passages from the Sefer Yetzirah, Book of Creation, were studied as a means to create an animated golem, although there is little in the writings of Jewish mysticism that supports this belief. It was believed that golems could be activated by an ecstatic experience induced by the ritualistic use of various letters of the Hebrew alphabet forming a Shem, any one of the names of God, wherein the Shem was written on a piece of paper and inserted in the mouth or in the forehead of the golem. A golem is inscribed with Hebrew words, such as the word emet, truth in Hebrew, written on its forehead. The golem could then be deactivated by removing the aleph in emet, thus changing the inscription from truth to death. The golem is in effect a reified servitor. An advanced servitor that can be objectively seen is usually called an egregore. Wouldn't you like to create golems of the mind that operate in the collective unconscious and manipulate other minds to make them do what you want? What are robots? They are physicalized servitors. As AI takes over more and more of the world, we are allowing computerized servitors to rule us. What about AI and servitors? In today's world, we can conceive of AIs, algorithms and deep learning systems as cyber servitors, enacting the will of big tech. In the Matrix, all the sentient programs, including the agents, were servitors of the architect who governed the Matrix, who was in turn a servitor of the machines that lived in machine world and made and controlled the Matrix. Can servitors help with rain dances? When shamans did rain dances, were they creating a servitor to produce rain? Is each role performed by an actor a servitor? It's pressed into service for a specific task, the actor's performance, and then discarded. Acting roles that become iconic are converted into egregores that influence culture, and the most iconic performances of all become god forms and take on a numinosity which can change people's religious, spiritual, political and philosophical beliefs. We are all confronted by a constant war of sigils and servitors, variously manifesting as beliefs, opinions, memes, symbols, signs, actors, politicians, prophets, priests, celebrities, influencers and so much. The era of Donald Trump showed that his conservative Republican base was willing to treat him as a god form. George Floyd, murdered on the street by the police, has become a god form for liberals. Republicans make god forms of the persecutors and Democrats of the persecuted. The more persecuted you are, the more the Democrats sanctify you, and the most sanctified of all are those who are murdered by the authorities. Jesus Christ is the world's most successful religious figure because he was a god form to both conservatives, who saw him as upholding the conservative divine order, and liberals, who saw him as the ultimate liberal victim, God himself murdered by the authorities. George Floyd partakes of the Christ God form, while Donald Trump partakes of the God the Father God form. Either way, it's always a bad idea to adopt victimhood God forms. You should always embrace strength God forms. If you identify with victims, you become a victim. In truth, the conservatives worship the God of the Old Testament, the vengeful God of violence, justice and judgment, while the liberals worship the God of the New Testament, the god of victimhood who celebrates the weak, the downtrodden, and the poor, and says, the first will be last and the last will be first. People invest a huge amount of energy in god forms and these then bestride the world like colossi. Curiously, intellectuals almost never make it to the status of god forms. Albert Einstein and Stephen Hawking are the only scientists to have made it big in the public consciousness, and the latter only because he was in a wheelchair and had a mechanical voice. If you ask the average person about Einstein or Hawking's work, they wouldn't have a clue. If you ask them about the latest gossip concerning the Kardashians, they would know it chapter and verse. That's humanity for you. Nearly all of humanity's god forms are tawdry and pathetic, and anything other than godly. Are ghosts actually servitors? Do people really see ghosts out there? Or are ghosts ethereal because they are actually in here, in the mind? Is a ghost a servitor that enters the minds of those that are haunted, so that they see it and no one else does, or an egregore that can be objectively seen by many people at once? The amount of energy possessed by an entity determines whether it is a servitor or an egregore. Do you create or summon a servitor? Does a sorcerer create a servitor from scratch, or summon a pre-existent spirit which then serves as a servitor? Are hybrid servitors possible, i.e., part creation and part pre-existent spirit? Can servitors be assembled from both the sorcerer's individual psyche and the collective psyche of the universe? Can servitors be reprogrammed? Phil Hine wrote, it does help to further construct the servitor's persona as an individual entity, and is also useful for focusing on when you are recalling the servitor for reabsorption or reprogramming. Theoretically, you could create one servitor and then, instead of destroying it, or reabsorbing it into your psyche, simply keep repurposing it, reprogramming it to perform new tasks as soon as it completes the previous ones, just as you could reprogram a golem with a new command. It's time for the rise of multi-purpose servitors. It's time for Golem World. That's Golem, not Gollum. Give me the precious. I wants it.